So welcome to everyone to today's Stats Cafe on machine learning for sentiment analysis. My name is Rike Hansen and I'm currently in charge of ESCAP Statistics Division. Now the topic of today is part of a broader strategy of ESCAPs on the enhanced use of big data for official statistics. This is a topic that's given high priority by chief statisticians throughout Asia and the Pacific as a region. And the cafe we're organizing today is also, it's kind of part of a whole series of stats cafes that have been organized during the past year or so, where we focused on different types of big data and different uses of big data for different types of official statistics. We've heard in earlier cafes on the use of mobile phone data, satellite data, remote sensing data, etc. And we've seen some of the uses both within the economic, environment, and social domains of statistics. And today the time has come for social media data and other types of text which can be scraped from the web. And now this type of information is very, very different to sort of our more traditional inputs for statistics production in the form of survey data, administrative data, and it comes with a unique set of challenges. And this is one of the things that we are going to hear about today. And we hope with this cafe that we can give all of you some ideas of how to make use of text analysis for official statistics. And we also hope that during the discussion of today's cafe that we can generate some ideas for future uses of sentiment analysis and including for SDG monitoring. So do feel free, all of you, to put your ideas in the chat during the cafe, raise your hand when there's time for discussions. And I want to thank my colleague from ESCAP Statistical Institute, SIAP, Mr. Christophe Bontin, who's really taken the initiative to organize today's Stats Cafe. And I want to also thank the participating experts from BPS, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, and the UN Global Pulse office in Jakarta for collaborating with us today on this Stats Cafe, which is on a really exciting topic. And I also look forward to learning a lot during the next 60 minutes. So without further ado, welcome to all of you again. And I'll hand it over to the moderator of today's cafe, Christophe. Christophe, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Rike, for the kind words and a warm welcome to all. I'm very excited to be moderating this session on machine learning for sentiment analysis. We have three wonderful presentations today. I imagine they will be wonderful. I'm sure they will be wonderful. And four speakers. I will introduce them later on, but let me say that they will share their experience on how to use the type of data, as Rike just said, that the type of data that we are not using so much and so often, and we are not comfortable working with, that is text data. And I'm very impressed by the fact that we can generate such knowledge using text data. But let's not anticipate it so much. A few housekeeping rules. For those of you who are not familiar with the Stats Cafe, first, it's a pity that you are not familiar because it is really a great opportunity to learn from others. And second, you have the chance to review all the previous sessions on the ESCAP website. We have now 40 recording of the 40 Stats Cafe. So if you're not familiar, please go there. And if you're not familiar with the Stats Cafe, we'll be recording the session. So we ask you to stay on mute all the time and check regularly that you are still on mute for the comfort of all and also for the recording. Please ask your question on the chat box, and we will take the question and ask this question to the presenter at the end of this session. Since the time is quite limited there, without further ado, I will start by introducing our first two speakers. And I will want to thank them for being there with us today. So we have our first speaker for this first presentation is Sri Ganesh Loknathan. Sri Ganesh is the data innovation and policy lead at UN Global Pulse Jakarta. He will probably introduce Global Pulse for those of you who are not familiar with this wonderful institution. Sri Ganesh is a practitioner and an interlocutor at the nexus of data, algorithm, policy, and development across emerging Asia-Pacific. And we have also Reza Mustaid. Reza is a full stack engineer at also Global Pulse Jakarta with specialties in software engineering, data science, and visualization with AI techniques. So we have two great experts there, and they will present under the title of Sentiment Analysis Application in International Development Application and caveats. So without any further ado, please, the floor is yours, Sri Ganesh. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Christoph, once again for the invitation. My colleague Reza and I will be talking based on our experiential learnings from the work that the lab has done since its the start in 2012. Next slide, please. Could I have the next slide? Yes, thank you. So Pulse Lab Jakarta is a joint innovation facility here in Indonesia, partly owned by the sort of government of Indonesia and partly the UN. But we are part of the UN Global Pulse Network with sister labs in Kampala, Helsinki, and New York. And this network sits directly under the ESOG, the Secretary General's office in New York. These are some of our priority domains that we work in since the start of our existence in 2012. We also do a lot of strategic exploration in areas outside of what is listed here. Next slide, please. All right. And I'd like to invite my colleague, Reza, to continue with the presentation, and I'll come back at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sri Ganesh. I will take some slides to talk, starting from a brief of sentiment analysis. The sentiment analysis has a broad and complex task, but the most simple task is to determine whether a piece of writing is a positive, negative, or neutral. There are four main processes to do the sentiment analysis, but the text processing is the most important part because this process converts complex text into simple text, which can help the classification algorithms have a good performance. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are many sentiment classification techniques. However, nowadays the most popular technique is the machine learning approach because this technique allows the engine to try to understand the context of the text. Next slide, please. Several governments across the world are trying to move closer to their citizens to achieve transparency and engagement. And the explosion of social media is opening new opportunities to achieve it. And then the sentiment analysis allows us to get an overview of the citizens' opinion and quickly see the sentiment behind everything, means being better able to have a good strategy and plan for the future. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is one of our projects that uses sentiment analysis. This is a joint collaborations of the Ministry of Planning and Pulse Lab Jakarta. The aim of this project is to monitor Twitter conversations, how they relate to local and world events. There are three main events we monitor about soybean crisis, cut of fuel subsidy, and new food agency. Based on this research, in figure 1, we found that the volume of tweets increases on the date news published. And in figure 2, for your information, the red line is a negative reactions, blue is positive, and the line color is wondering or confused reactions. The research findings shows many people give negative reactions to the food price news. The same thing happened to the cuts on fuel subsidy. There are so many wondering and negative reactions, which means there are still many people who do not fully understand why the government needs to cut this fuel subsidy and will it have an impact on food price or not. These insights provide an understanding of what is happening in the community, and it can help to create new strategies. For example, like maybe providing more detailed clarifications and in-depth understanding of people to the people. Next slide, please. This is another project to track and analyze online conversations related to immunizations in multi-countries, especially for India, Kenya, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Research findings shows that on social media, Nigerian and Pakistani politicians are active in the vaccinations debate, and politics terms is always mentioned on the debate. However, in Kenya, religious and ideological aspects are discussed more often. This project demonstrates how methods, including the sentiment analysis, can be used to support public health workers and like the communications campaign. Next slide, please. There are two main challenges in sentiment analysis. The first is issues with the language itself, especially in global south countries, which always have like the multilingual and heterogeneous languages. For example, in Indonesia, we have around 700 languages. We have a Javanese language, Sundanese, Malay, Madurese, and etc. And for each one regional language or the traditional language can have several dialects as well. We can imagine this problem also causes the lack of sufficient digitized corpus. The next problem is linguistic drift that also affect the contextual meaning. Linguistic drift change dialects and somehow can generate a new language. For example, a Javanese-speaking area that is close to a Sundanese-speaking area will have an intersect area that has the potential to produce mixed language. And in long time, this intersect area will produce a new language. In this example, like the Cirebonese language is the result of mixture of Javanese and Sundanese. From year to year, the number of languages in Indonesia is increasing. We can imagine this linguistic drift and mixed language makes difficult to get better contextual meaning. The contextual meaning is a big challenge as well. Sometimes there are slang words that can completely change the contextual meaning. For example, in Indonesia, like cabai. Cabai is a formal word which means chili in English, but somehow cabai is also slang word to interpret a young girl with hot pants. This slang word totally changing the contextual meaning, especially when we do the text analysis for food. There are a lot of bits about cabai, but it refers to a young girl with hot pants, not about food. Next slide, please. The second is a general technical problem. This problem already exists even for languages that have a good digital corpus. I mean, this problem occurs for all languages in the world. There are 6 main problems that need to be solved in sentiment analysis as listed on this slide. But the most challenging are sarcasm and tone. As we know that the sentiment analysis uses machines to perform classifications, but the main question is how we can build a machine that can think and act like a human, because the machine must be able to analyze and understand emotions like the human brain does. And then because of this problem, many researchers using machine learning approach to understand the context of the text. But yeah, it's not as simple as that. I mean, there are a lot of things to do on the machine learning to solve this problem. And for now, there are no techniques that can guarantee 100% this problem can be solved. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think that's all from my side. Over to Sri Ganesh.
Thank you, Reza. Just to continue this, my colleague talked a lot about this kinds of technical challenges that we face. but there's also sort of challenges that are there when we move from thinking about these as proof of concept projects to trying and making these mainstreamed and as part of the normal work processes for different government institutions. Obviously, one of the most critical ones is really having sustainable long-term data access to these data streams in a privacy-preserving mechanism, especially in the case for a large amount of the public sentiment data is in the private sphere. So striking up these kinds of long-term data partnerships are critical in such a manner that allows for privacy preserving as may be needed. But also, these need to come, when you sort of having these partnerships, it helps facilitate a number of things, right? One of the most critical things for anyone from the statistical community is to really understand data provenance. When you are trying to leverage data that has not been produced by the direct statistical community itself, understanding the data provenance is key, and you can't do that without having some level of access, at least in the initial stages, to the data production process inside the private sector organization that is generating this data, and which can be quite tough. Secondly, I think in a way this is slightly a methodological issue, which is the fact that this is all behavioral data, things that people are saying over time and space. And behavioral data is not consistent across time and space. So we need to always be asking the question is whose opinion are we measuring when we don't have a sufficient understanding of representativity. So you may need to utilize a couple other techniques on top of this kind of analysis to really try and get some sense of the population base that whose opinion that you're getting opinions from. Otherwise, you're going to have inherent bias in the results that you may come up with. Thirdly, and just because you may not necessarily have the kind of rigorous precision that may be needed from a statistical community perspective doesn't mean that this data is not necessarily useful. But at the same time, what is happening is the state of the art is evolving, and we may hopefully get to a place where we can have the kinds of statistical rigor that we may ideally want. But till that time, I think there are ways of trying to figure out how to integrate these kind of methods, etc., into existing decision-making platforms, decision-making pathways. Next slide, please. And this will be the last one, our conclusion. So overall, what we do find is that the large amount of digitized data that exists around, especially around public opinion, offers an opportunity to understand public opinion at scale, and that too frequently. This definitely gives the ability to at least give you a pulse or a sense in a tight feedback loop to any interventions that may be undertaken, and this can be done as I said, in a faster feedback loop. As I mentioned earlier as well, while the state of the art is continuing to evolve, we don't need to wait till all the problems are solved before using these kind of techniques in real world scenarios. Mainstreaming does require more work, and it's essential to really understand existing decision-making pathways. So here in the lab, for example, we have multiple teams, even a social systems teams that studies human-centered design and incorporates that, leverages that in trying to understand and properly fit our innovation into decision-making pathways in government. I hope this was informative, and we are happy to take questions in the question and answer or afterwards as well, virtually through email. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you, Sri Ganesh and Reza, for this very interesting presentation showing that sentiment analysis can help us understanding public perception to a variety of SDG areas, and also for emphasizing the fact that there are not only technical challenges, but also data access challenges, which we should not minimize. We should move forward very fast to the second presentation, and I'm very happy to welcome Siti Maria. Siti is assistant professor at the BPS Indonesia. With her colleague Asita Shekhar, she has recently produced a very interesting paper on sentiment analysis using Twitter data. She will present that paper today. The title is just Tweets-Based Subjective Happiness Index in Indonesia. Thank you, Siti, for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christoph. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the time. And I would like to present our research, Tweet-Based Subjective Happiness Index. This was a collaboration with my student, Asita Asri, and me. We are from Polytechnic Statistika SDS, Statistics Indonesia. So next, please. Yeah. So if we talk about happiness, maybe I mean, like, happiness can mean that something feel about a feeling of pleasure and satisfaction with something that is considered noble, and happiness also can interpret it as what is felt for effort to achieve and fulfills one's goals. But the other side, happiness can reflect the development and the well-being of a region. So in Indonesia, we apply for a local autonomy. So each local government can prosper their community with the development. And we can measure it. So in 2014 and 2017, BPS Statistic Indonesia performed a survey that measured the happiness level of Indonesia. So this is a national figure, and the respondents are asked about the life satisfaction, and then the effect dimensions and eudaimonia dimensions. So they score the happiness level from 0 to 100, and this is national estimate. So but unfortunately, the survey is no longer performed. So at the time, we were thinking that can we do the similar thing but different approaches or different data sources? And we found that the fact social media is quite popular in Indonesia, especially in Twitter. So, given the statistics of the Twitter user in Indonesia reach more than 15 millions, and Twitter also provides like a streaming API with different access grade. It provides 70 variables. For about 70 variables, we can get the tweet text, we can get a user profile, location, timestamp, and this is the real-time data, and the velocity is very high. And we look at another previous study. So another previous study done by Dodd, they developed like social network hedonometrics and Twitter, and it was very amazing because they developed LabMT 1.0 that contains word lists and its average happiness representing a set to happy spectrum, and also they revealed that the content of tweets does appear to reflect people's current circumstances. Next, please. So in this study, we want to see we want to do a feasibility study. So we want to see if it is possible to do, and if it is possible, so what tweets or what data set we have to choose, and what the method should be applied. And we want to find the pattern of tweets and the pattern of happiness from a set of samples. Next, please. So we try to collect the data. Maybe this is a very technical thing. So we apply for Twitter streaming API access, and to make sure that the tweets come from Indonesia, we set the bounding box. So we set the bounding box based on Indonesian map, Indonesian locations. And due to the time limitation, we just stream the tweets from April to July in 2018, and we filter the tweets based on the languages, because in fact, if you look at the data sets, as tweets are written in many language, in traditional language and foreign language. So we just filter out only for Bahasa Indonesia, Malay, and English, and we got the samples of the tweets from the Twitter. Next, please. And then, yeah, after we got the data, we do pre-processing. So, like Reza said in the previous presentation, this is the very important part, and it takes more time than the analysis itself because the tweets is very noise. So we need to do pre-processing. We remove like URL and symbols and pictures and anything that we do not need for analysis. And also we do the formalizing. So we found that some tweets are written in slang words. So to further analysis, we have to formalize all words, and we have like an NLP, natural language technology, that can formalize the word. And then we do the cleaning after formalizing, and we continue to stemming. We like the stemming is a process to cut the suffix and prefix of a word and produce the root word. And also we continue to stop word removal. It's very technical, I'm sorry, but I have to say that that's the process that we have to do before the analysis itself. And because we analyze the happiness and most tweets using the emoticon, so we extract all emoticon, all emoji, and we translate to string to the meaning, to the word of the emoticon itself, and then we combine it into the to calculate the subjective happiness index. Next, please. So the next process after we got the clean tweets, we do the tokenization. So tokenization is you you chunk you chunk the sentence, you chunk the tweets. So you produce a list of words of the tweets, and then we continue to score each word in the tweets. So the scores means the average happiness of a word. So we use the LabMT dictionary. So I will introduce you what is a LabMT dictionary. The scores scales from 1 to 9. The higher the score, the happier the word. So if get the score 9, is very happy. And then we produce maybe it's not large, it's just 2 million score tweets. This is the formula how we calculate this average happiness index for each word. And we also calculate average index based on their location, so based on the district and then based on the province, because tweets is very rich. You have information about the location, although we cannot ensure 100% the location is telling you about the location of the tweet when it is paused, or the location of the user itself. Next, please. Yeah, I would like to introduce, yeah, we also do the evaluation. So we're using 100 tweets. So we ask some colleagues to manual labeling. So our colleague scores 9 to a tweet if shows the happiest sentiment, and 1 to the saddest sentiment, and to 0 for the unknown tweets. Yeah, we also find that we cannot understand the meaning of the tweets, so we label into 0. So then we compare our colleagues labeling with the LabMT scores. Continue, please. And then yeah, next. Yeah, this is the LabMT. This is you can use because this is free. This is a software that uses language assessment by Mechanical Turk MT word list to score the happiness of a corpus. So actually, if maybe some of you ever heard about Amazon Mechanical Turk, so this is a word list of more than 5,000 words. That the words most frequently appearing in four sources like Twitter, New York Times, Google Books, music lyrics, and and then the score here, if you look at the picture, the louder, the word louder get the score 8.5 and so on and so forth. And then next. And then this is like a screenshot of our database. So if so every step in the pre-processing and the process, we record the results. So we record all results for each step. Next, please. Yeah. So uh, we were looking for the tweet distribution. So if you look at the Indonesian map, the darker the color, the most tweet posts. So yeah, I think the result makes sense. So in Java province, all the province are dark red, and the DKI Jakarta as the capital of Indonesia and Jawa Barat is are the province with the most tweets posts, and Java Island here, Java Island, contributes more than 70% of total tweets. And the green dots show you the happy sentiment or the happy word, and also the red dots show you the sad tweets. Next, please. And we calculate the national figure, the Indonesian average subjective index. I think due to the size of tweets that we can collect, the average happiness index is of 5.59, with the lowest index is 1.75 and the highest is 8.26. And then we try to cluster the province based on that region, based on that subjective happiness index. And the red uh, color shows the province with the lowest subjective happiness index, and the green one are the happy province. We call the happy province. So the interesting part is coincide with the streaming time, there were several cultural festival in Gorontalo. So we found that most Gorontalo people tweets were written in positive tone, in happy tone. So and while in Nusa Tenggara Timur, most of tweets were about complaints. So complaints about job, politics, and other. And compared to the poverty rate, we we also curious with the relationship between subjective happiness index and the poverty rate. So we compare to poverty rate in March and September 2018, and the subjective happiness index seems contrary to the poverty rate. So, for example, Nusa Tenggara Timur and Titi. Is the third province with the highest poverty rate, and Kalimantan Tengah is the green one, is the fourth province with the lowest poverty rate. So the higher the subjective happiness index, the lower the poverty rate, and vice versa. And then next, please. We
Siti, if
also
you could,
begin. Yep.
if you could wrap it up in 1 or
Okay.
maximum 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And then, yeah, we also, it's similar with the province, but due to the rich information about the location, we also cluster in each district. And then continue, please. Yeah, and the next we are interested in, we also find that the number of tweets post each day shows a similar pattern and a consistent pattern day by day. So the number of tweets reach a peak at 12 noon, maybe at the lunchtime, and increase in the night until 10 p.m. Next, please. And also, we are interested in the trend of a subjective happiness index. So the happiness index seems fluctuated per day, but seems to show a similar pattern between days. So subjective happiness index decrease in the morning, in the afternoon, during going home from work or from school, and increases in the morning, and it is higher at the weekend than on the weekdays. Yeah. So I can conclude our research. So tweets reflect daily life and show emotion and expression of public, whoever they are, and written in formal bahasa Indonesia and slang word and traditional languages. So to analyze this data, we have to engage with natural language processing technology. And given the sampling issue, although we cannot generalize the result, but it can use as a signal or complementary of a similar measurement. And the subjective happiness tends to reflect a contrary pattern with the poverty rate. And based on the evaluation, the scores is consistent. Yeah, I think that's all that I can share with you. I'm happy to listen to your comments, suggestion, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siti, for showing us the huge effort you have done with your colleague on analysis and cleaning the data using NLP. For my side, it's the first time I see emoticon translated into a sentiment, and I think it's also very interesting. I'm sorry we don't have time to discuss so much, so I will call the last presenter, Christopher Ball, to share his screen right now. And
there we go.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Christopher, sorry, I introduce you. You are economic advisor at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, and in February 2010, in response to the pandemic, you and your colleague at Stat New Zealand, you have started to work on economic news sentiment using Gdelt database. I'm sure you will tell us all about it. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. So this work was done while I was seconded down to Stats New Zealand just after COVID hit, and it looks at creating a high-frequency news sentiment measure for New Zealand specifically. But as we'll sort of see, the underlying database, so the news article level database, Gdelt, is freely available. It's high frequency, so every 15 minutes, and it's an article level database. It doesn't give you the article text, but it does provide you with a link to the online resource, so you can have a look at that yourself if you're wanting to separately verify the measures which they present for the articles. It gives you the tone or sentiment. Now I'll explain what that is a little bit later. Thematic coding of the topics which are talked about in the article, the list of people, groups, or places which are mentioned, the source, so the publisher, the publication time, and any links to other articles which it picks up through the text analysis. So it does a lot of the pre-processing work for us, so we can focus on creating measures from the underlying database rather than having to do a lot of the tokenization, machine learning, automatic, thematic coding stuff over the top of it. So this presentation goes through a high-frequency news sentiment measure for New Zealand, focusing on economic news, and it compares it to our existing lower frequency measures of consumer and business confidence. And it's probably worth mentioning that Stats NZ have picked up this work since I've left, and they're currently developing an experimental economic news sentiment measure for New Zealand, which I'm hoping will be available in the next 3 or 4 months. So the underlying database, Gdelt, it's supported by Google Jigsaw, so they have a whole lot of automation which scrapes practically every news website in the world. Not quite, some languages are better than others. They process all of the text of the underlying articles, and they update the database every 15 minutes with any article that was published or changed within the last 15 minutes. It includes real-time translation of 65 languages, and that represents about 98.4% of its daily non-English monitoring volume. So there's about 1.6% which isn't picked up through the real-time translation. And they have real-time measurement of about 2,500 emotions and themes now. They've added a few more since COVID, and they can do assessment of emotions and themes natively in around 15 languages. So English, French, Spanish. I can't remember the other ones off the top of my head, but 15 total. So the tone measure we get through this, the metadata tells us that it's a difference between the percentage of positive words and the percentage of negative words, where you code the words as either positive, negative, or neutral. It doesn't give full data on exactly how they're classified as positive, negative, or neutral, but earlier Gdelt blog post suggests that it's the same measure which is used in the lead developer's earlier published work. But there are also alternative tone measures provided in the sort of extra data Gdelt provides, which have sort of better metadata and better. So you've got Veda, all of the usual machine learning sentiment measures already sitting there as well. So what type of data sets are we talking about here? So each 15-minute block is supplied as a 5 to 50 megabyte compressed zip file. It really depends on what time of the day it is, as to how big that zip file is, and they extract to about a 20 to 200 megabyte CSV file for each 15 minutes. So a weekly update requires downloading about 10 gig of compressed data and processing about 30 gigabytes. A full year can quite easily require processing 1.5 to 2 terabytes worth of data. We're quite lucky that only a small fraction of the articles available reference New Zealand, so we can do a very quick pass to filter it down to the articles which are New Zealand relevant, and the historical files are not revised. So all we need to do is check whether the current set of files have been processed or not. We don't need to sort of go back and reprocess them over and over again. So what do we do around aggregating across articles? We look, particularly for the economic series, as the percentage of economic themes as a percentage of the total theme. So we give a weight to each article based on this, and we also give a weight to each article based on New Zealand as a percentage of the total locations which are mentioned in the article. So articles which reference economics more or reference New Zealand more will get higher weight, and then it's just a weighted average of the tone in that article. The economic series also filters to articles where the economic related themes are more than 15% of the total themes present in the article. So we really try to filter out articles which only reference economics rather than are focused on economics. And we get this as the final series. It's a little bit out of date, this one, I apologize. Since I left Stats New Zealand, I haven't had a chance to update it because I just don't have the processing power and the storage which I had back there. But you do see a very strong negative spike around COVID. For those of you who aren't quite aware of the New Zealand circumstances, we had 2 major lockdowns in 2020. The first of which is the really deep one shown there, and the second one is the sort of resurgence dip in around August. So it does seem to pick up so quite significant movements in sentiment, particularly on the economic side. And I said I was going to compare it to our other low frequency measures. So this plot just standardizes the new sentiment measure and the business outlook, so business confidence measures, and shows them on a common scale. It's not quite as good as the next one I'm going to show you very quickly, which is the consumer confidence measures. So one of the key motivations for why we wanted a high frequency news sentiment measure was to see if we could get an early read on what was happening with either business or consumer confidence. It looks a lot closer to consumer confidence than business confidence, but one of the limitations with Gdelt is that it's only available with this level of detail since about 2015. Whereas the monthly series we use for consumer and business confidence don't really give you enough to sort of run your usual statistical tests to see how close how closely correlated these series are to each other, with the sort of level of robustness we usually like with time series analysis. And just quickly to summarize, we've presented a high frequency, low lag measure of sentiment from Gdelt's news database. That was in one of the slides I cut out, but it's available literally up to the 15 minutes previous, so I could get the news articles as of half an hour ago and process them right now if I wanted to. It compares well to existing lower frequency measures of economic confidence, particularly consumer confidence, although it is measuring something different to what the traditional measures of consumer confidence are picking up. And just quickly on future applications, we're looking at creating similar series for other concepts like employment, racism, or housing. We're looking also to do some social network analysis of the organizations or groups or people who are mentioned in the news to see how they're related to each other and how the tone reflects those relationships. And there is one really interesting new series coming out through Gdelt, which takes snapshots of the ordering of the front page of most major news publications. So our current approach is a volume of articles approach. This would allow us to potentially add an extra dimension of how important a particular news series is or how prominent it's being displayed through local or international news. So I'll stop there and I'll hand back over to Christoph. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today.
Thank you, Christopher, for this presentation and for making it short so that we could have time for questions. I really loved your tone analysis there and the fact that you use almost real time for your analysis. And that's quite impressive that we can do such things right now. So I would love to thank all the speakers and ask our audience if you have some questions, and also because of the technical glitch we have at the beginning, if we can have a little bit more time and have 10 additional minutes for the Stat Cafe. So that will allow us to have some questions. So please put your questions in the chat box. And while you're doing that, I have one question maybe for Sri Ganesh first. And it's a very general question, so other presenter can also answer that. The question is, this data source are difficult to handle maybe in the long term. And you mentioned the fact that there are some problems in having some relationship with partners for gathering this data. So the question is, how can we use this data set and these techniques in the long term for, well, how can we ensure the consistency of the approach with the data, with the technique, with the people, and with the methods also, considering the fact that we are in changing times. So maybe Sri Ganesh, if you have a view on that?
Yeah, let me take a crack at that question. And I think the advantage that we have right now is that there is a sufficient body of work emerging through the use of this kind of data, which has meant that other organizations in the world have started to create these partnerships to be able to access for their own particular purposes, which is providing the lessons of how these kind of partnerships can occur, right? In some cases, like in Twitter, there's a commercial route already available that was available for a very long time, right? To gain access to this. And, not all data necessarily needs to be for free. That I think in a way for Twitter, it's possible. And, for research purposes, a sample set is available. Here at the UN, we have a UN-wide agreement with Twitter, for example, that allows us, which is managed by Global Pulse, which provides, there are limits to, in terms of how much data we can take out, etc. And having to do some due diligence in terms of privacy, but that exists for the UN system already, which was facilitated by UN Global Pulse. In terms of the other ongoing engagements, I think the trick is when, for international organizations, international data companies, you already have emergent use cases of partnerships happening. So we can just potentially leverage some of that to then do it for specific organizations. It's a little harder in terms of when it's in country in a global south with a company that is based out of the global south country itself. But that is happening already. And I think the more we do it, the more that we will learn from all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Ganesh. Maybe we can move on to Rike's question. I think it's a very interesting one, and it's for Christopher. Can you share any internal discussion in Stats New Zealand on the use of the Gdelt data for statistics and productions? I think that how can we use that in production? What are the pros, concerns?
Yep. So I think it's fair to say that it's still early days and we're still investigating what the best way of using this high frequency big data is in the statistical production framework. For this one in particular, there's a lot of interest because it's freely available and it leverages a lot of Stats New Zealand and the advantages they have in terms of being able to productionize big data products and to provide those meaningfully to other customers around, say, New Zealand government or businesses which don't necessarily have that capability. So it's probably a little bit too early to give sort of too much real detail on the ground, but we're hoping to get a sort of experimental series published in the next 3 or 4 months, and then we can potentially share the learnings from that with other interested parties.
Okay, thank you. So we will wait for that and follow what's your work on that. We have a question from my colleague Pinar here, and I think City may be addressed to you about how we can really measure happiness, since it's very subjective, and the fact that we collect the data through Twitter. I think there are some question about the quality of the data, and maybe we can enlarge this question to the where are the real problem, either in the quality of the data or the selection bias we may have there, because not everybody has Twitter, versus the technical burden you have shown us that is also very difficult. So how can we address these two technical challenges?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, yeah, we are aware that there is like a selections bias and also the sampling issue. So that's why I state that this is a subjective, and this is not the official. I mean, like official figures. It's only a signal. So when BPS want to release the survey results, sometimes it need to like evaluate on the real fact. I mean, like in the real situations, and we want to capture the real phenomena and real. I mean, like what happened in real life. We can use various approach, right? So this is like the study is like a feasibility study that we just want to know is it feasible or not, is it possible or not, and what is the limitation and what is the advantage. So yeah, we are aware this has a many challenging in terms of the sampling, and it's just like a complementary information. So this can be used as a complementary. So that's I can answer.
Many thanks. That's a very, very good answer, and I think we have to be very careful in the way we communicate this result. And I think that's a very important point you raised there, and I think all the presenters here will agree with that. I hope that. So I don't see any further question here in the chat, and we are already a little bit late, and I know some of you have some appointment after this meeting. So I would love to thank very warmly all the presenter here. Thank you so much for your presentation. Congratulations for the hard work you have been doing on this topic. We know it's difficult. We know it's technical. We know there are lots of challenges, and you emphasize that maybe not as much as it's really in real life. So thank you for sharing your experience there. And sorry again about the technical glitch at the beginning, but I hope that you all have gained knowledge in the fact that we can use big data here, and we are on the way to using this big data for producing very interesting insight and SDG related information that could be useful. Not yet in production, but we are close to that. I think that would be an hope for the future, and you have gave us some hope that we can all use that. We can maybe replicate that, and we hope that you will have many questions and you will enjoy reading all the materials that have been produced for this Stats Café and for all this work. Thank you again to all the presenters and for all the participants there, and see you next time for another Stats Café. Thank you all.